In the cold depths of space, a lone fighter streaked through the inky void. Its angular silhouette stood out against the backdrop of distant stars, a steel predator gliding on an invisible current. Within its cramped confines sat Zax Derringer, a hardened soldier of the Terran Defense Corps. Zax's eyes scanned his instrument panel, checking for any signs of trouble. He was no stranger to danger, having earned his reputation through countless engagements with hostile alien forces. His skills in infiltration, sabotage, and close-quarters combat had made him an invaluable asset to humanity's struggle against the ruthless Krelthax Empire. On this particular mission, Zax found himself deep in enemy-controlled territory. Intel had pinpointed a critical Krelthax supply depot, a hub for their warfare machine. High Command had tasked Zax with scouting the facility and, if possible, crippling its operations. It was a high-stakes assignment, even for a veteran like Zax. As his fighter drifted closer to the depot's coordinates, Zax's instincts prickled with unease. The area was too quiet, devoid of the usual chatter and energy signatures associated with a major Krelthax installation. He double-checked his scanners, but they showed nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted off his starboard side. Zax barely had time to register the explosion before his ship rocked violently, alarms blaring in protest. He fought to maintain control, hands flying across the controls as he tried to assess the damage. "Ambush!" Zax growled through gritted teeth. Out of the darkness, a swarm of Krelthax fighters materialized, their angular hulls reflecting the fire of their opening salvo. They descended upon Zax like a pack of hungry wolves, laser cannons spitting searing beams of energy. Zax reacted on pure instinct, throwing his ship into a dizzying series of evasive maneuvers. He juked and rolled, desperate to shake his pursuers, but the Krelthax were relentless. They matched his every move, slowly tightening the noose. In a last-ditch effort, Zax diverted power to his engines and punched the throttle. His fighter surged forward, straining against the G-forces as it sought to outrun the enemy formation. For a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed he might break free. But the Krelthax had anticipated this move. A barrage of missiles streaked from their launch bays, locking onto Zax's heat signature. He jinked hard to port, deploying countermeasures, but it was too late. The missiles detonated in a series of blinding flashes, shredding his ship's armor and sending it careening off course. Smoke filled the cockpit as Zax fought to regain control. His displays flickered and died, leaving him flying blind. The acrid stench of burning circuitry filled his nostrils, and he could feel the icy clutch of vacuum as the hull integrity failed. With a sickening lurch, Zax's fighter went into an uncontrolled spin. He battled the controls, trying to right his trajectory, but the stick was unresponsive. Through the cracked canopy, he caught a glimpse of the Krelthax ships closing in, their predatory silhouettes looming ever larger. In that moment, Zax knew he was doomed. His ship was crippled, his weapons offline, and his escape pods destroyed. The Krelthax had him dead to rights, and they weren't known for taking prisoners. But as the enemy fighters surrounded him, their tractor beams locking onto his stricken vessel, Zax refused to give in to despair. He was a soldier of Earth, a warrior forged in the fires of countless battles. If this was to be his end, he would face it with the same unwavering courage that had defined his life. As the tractor beams dragged his crippled fighter towards the waiting Krelthax mothership, Zax steeled himself for whatever lay ahead. He knew the road would be hard, the trials unimaginable, but he would endure. For his comrades, for his home, for the future of humanity itself, Zax Derringer would fight to his last breath. Thus began the greatest test of Zax's life, a crucible that would forge him into a legend. Little did he know, as the airlock doors of the Krelthax ship slammed shut behind him, that his true destiny was just beginning to unfold. The interior of the Krelthax ship was a nightmarish fusion of organic and mechanical elements. Pulsing conduits, reminiscent of veins, snaked along the walls, while the deck plates thrummed with an unsettling rhythm. Zax, his hands bound behind his back, was roughly marched through these eerie corridors by a contingent of Krelthax warriors. The warriors were imposing figures, their exoskeletons a mottled gray, adorned with cruel-looking spikes and barbs. They moved with a predatory grace, their compound eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence. Each was armed with a wicked-looking plasma rifle, the weapons trained unwaveringly on Zax. As they traveled deeper into the ship, Zax took note of his surroundings, his training kicking in. He marked potential exits, structural weaknesses, anything that might prove useful if an opportunity for escape presented itself. But for now, outnumbered and unarmed, he had little choice but to comply with his captors. Eventually, they arrived at a cavernous chamber that could only be the ship's bridge. Dominating the space was a raised dais, upon which sat a particularly large and menacing Krelthax. This, Zax surmised, must be the warlord Gravenak, the notorious commander whose exploits had earned him a fearsome reputation throughout the galaxy. Gravenak rose from his throne as Zax was brought before him, his chitinous plates shifting with an unsettling clicking sound. He regarded the human with a mixture of disdain and cruel amusement, his mandibles twitching in what might have been a smile. "So, this is the great Zax Derringer," Gravenak rasped, his voice a grating buzz. "The human who has caused my forces so much trouble. I must admit, I expected more." Zax met the warlord's gaze unflinchingly, his jaw set in a defiant line. "Sorry to disappoint," he quipped, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Gravenak's eyes narrowed, and he motioned to one of the warriors. The Krelthax stepped forward and delivered a vicious blow to Zax's midsection, doubling him over. Zax gasped, the wind driven from his lungs, but he refused to cry out. "You will learn respect, human," Gravenak hissed. "And you will learn to obey. You have information I require, information about your pathetic resistance. You will give me what I want." Zax straightened, a fierce grin splitting his face despite the pain. "I wouldn't bet on it, Bug Eye. I faced down tougher than you and never broke. Do your worst." Gravenak's mandibles flared in anger, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Respect, perhaps, or at least a grudging acknowledgement of Zax's courage. He waved a clawed hand, and the warriors seized Zax once more. Over the next several days, Zax was subjected to a brutal regimen of interrogation and torture. The Krelthax employed every method at their disposal, from searing energy probes to mind-warping chemicals, in an effort to break his will. But through it all, Zax remained defiant, drawing on reserves of strength he never knew he possessed. He retreated into the depths of his mind, focusing on pleasant memories and the ideals he fought for. He thought of his comrades, his friends, and the innocent lives counting on him. Each time the pain threatened to overwhelm him, he clung to these thoughts like a lifeline. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Gravenak called a halt to the interrogation. The warlord stood over Zax's battered form, a mix of frustration and grudging admiration playing across his alien features. "You are stronger than I anticipated, human," Gravenak admitted. "But your defiance will avail you nothing. If I cannot break you, I will simply find another way to make you serve the Krelthax Empire." With that ominous pronouncement, Gravenak ordered Zax to be taken away. The human was dragged from the interrogation chamber, his body broken, but his spirit undefeated. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it with the same indomitable will that had sustained him thus far. But even Zax, with all his training and fortitude, could not have anticipated the true horror that awaited him. For in the bowels of the Krelthax ship, a fate worse than death was brewing, a nightmare that would test the very limits of his courage and resolve. Zax was roughly thrown into a large, dimly lit chamber deep within the bowels of the Krelthax ship. The air was thick with a foul, oppressive stench that made his eyes water and his throat burn. As the heavy door slammed shut behind him, he heard Gravenak's parting words echo in his mind. "Let us see how long your defiance lasts in the dragon pits, human." Zax's heart raced as he took in his surroundings. The chamber was vast, its walls comprised of some sort of reinforced alloy. The floor was covered in a layer of coarse, reddish sand, stained darker in places by what could only be blood. But it was the chamber's other occupant that immediately commanded Zax's attention. In the center of the room, chained to the floor by a series of heavy restraints, was a creature out of nightmare. It was enormous, easily the size of a small starfighter, with a sinuous, serpentine body covered in iridescent scales. Powerful legs ending in wickedly taloned feet flexed and strained against the chains, while a pair of massive, leathery wings unfurled menacingly. But it was the creature's head that truly struck fear into Zax's heart. It was reptilian in nature, with a long, tooth-filled snout and a pair of eyes that glowed with a baleful amber light. Smoke curled from its nostrils, and when it opened its maw, Zax could see the flicker of flame deep within its throat. A dragon. Honest to God, fire-breathing dragon. Zax had heard stories of such beasts, whispered tales passed among spacers in seedy barrooms, but he had always dismissed them as mere legends. Yet here, confronted with the terrifying reality, he found his long-held skepticism evaporating rapidly. The dragon, noticing Zax's presence, let out a roar that shook the very walls of the chamber. It lunged forward, its chains straining as it snapped its jaws mere feet from where Zax stood. The human stumbled back, his mind racing as he sought for some way out of this predicament. But there was no escape. The door was sealed tight, and even if he could somehow get past the dragon, Zax knew that an army of Krulthak's warriors waited beyond. He was trapped, locked in with a creature that looked like it wanted nothing more than to turn him into a charred smear on the sand. As the dragon continued to thrash and bellow, Zax forced himself to take a deep breath. Panicking, he knew, would only hasten his demise. He needed to think, to find some way to survive this encounter. His eyes fell upon the restraints holding the dragon in place. They were heavy, industrial-grade chains, designed to withstand incredible force. Yet as Zax watched, he noticed that one of the links, perhaps weakened by the dragon's constant straining, looked slightly bent. An idea began to form in Zax's mind. It was crazy, suicidal even, but what other choice did he have? Steeling himself, he began to edge closer to the dragon, careful to stay out of range of its snapping jaws. The beast, sensing his approach, redoubled its efforts to break free. It lunged and writhed, its scales scraping against the sand in a desperate bid for freedom. But Zax, moving with a cautious deliberation, continued his advance. He began to speak, his voice low and soothing. He had no idea if the creature could understand him, but he poured every ounce of calm and reassurance he could muster into his words. "Easy now," he murmured. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon, to Zax's surprise, seemed to hesitate. Its thrashing lessened, and its fiery eyes fixed upon the human with what might have been curiosity. Emboldened, Zax took another step forward. He was close now, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the dragon's scales. Sweat beaded his brow, but he forced himself to maintain his composure. "That's it," he said softly. "That's it. I know you're scared. I know you're angry. But I'm not your enemy." Slowly, inch by painstaking inch, Zax closed the distance. The dragon watched him warily, smoke still curling from its nostrils, but it made no move to attack. Finally, Zax was close enough to reach out and touch the damaged chain. His heart in his throat, he extended a trembling hand. The dragon's eyes followed the movement, and for a moment, Zax was certain it would lunge. But then, to his utter shock, the beast lowered its head, allowing Zax's palm to come to rest on its snout. In that moment, something passed between human and dragon. A understanding, a connection forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Zax felt the creature's primal intelligence, its fierce, untamed spirit, and knew that he had found an unlikely ally. Together, they would face the trials ahead. Together, they would defy the Krulthaks and all who sought to break them. For in this strange, savage place, the human and the dragon had discovered a bond that transcended species and language. They had found hope. Warlord Graven AK was not accustomed to being defied. As the supreme commander of the Krulthak's forces, his word was law, his authority absolute. So when he received the report that the human prisoner, Zax Derringer, had not only survived the dragon pit, but had somehow tamed the beast within, his reaction was one of pure, unadulterated rage. "What do you mean, he's tamed it?" Graven AK roared, his voice echoing through the command center. The unfortunate subordinate who had delivered the news cowered before the warlord's fury, his exoskeleton quivering. The guards report that the human and the dragon are cooperating, warlord, the subordinate stammered. They seem to have formed some kind of bond. Graveneke's mind raced, trying to comprehend this unexpected development. He had thrown countless prisoners into the dragon pit, and not one had ever survived more than a few minutes. The dragons were supposed to be uncontrollable, untamable killing machines, the ultimate tool of execution for the Krulthax's enemies. Yet somehow, this human had not only survived, but had actually managed to establish a rapport with one of the beasts. It was unthinkable, an affront to everything Gravenake believed about the natural order of things. But even as his anger seethed, a cunning light began to glimmer in the warlord's eyes. He was a strategist, after all, and he did not become the supreme commander of the Krulthax by failing to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. This human, he mused, his voice taking on a calculating tone. He has a gift. A power we have never seen before. The subordinate, sensing a shift in the warlord's mood, dared to look up. "What are your orders, warlord?" he asked tentatively. Graven AK was silent for a long moment, his clawed fingers tapping a staccato rhythm on the arm of his command throne. Then, slowly, a cruel smile spread across his insectoid features. "Bring the human to me," he commanded. "And prepare the dragon for transport. I have a plan for our new pet." Within the hour, Zax found himself once again standing before Graven AK. But this time, the circumstances were very different. Instead of the interrogation chamber, they were in a massive hangar bay, the dragon crouched at Zax's side, a heavy collar around its neck. Graven AK approached, a cohort of elite warriors at his back. He looked at Zax with a mixture of loathing and grudging respect, his compound eyes glittering. "You have impressed me, human," the warlord said. "Not many could accomplish what you have done. You have a unique talent, one that I intend to put to use." Zax's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the dragon's flank. "I'm not interested in serving you or your empire," he said flatly. Graveneke's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. "You misunderstand," he said. "You will not be serving me. You will be training others to do what you have done." He gestured to the hangar around them. Zax, following the motion, felt his heart sink. Lining the walls were dozens of containment units, each housing a snarling, thrashing dragon. "You will teach my warriors to tame these beasts," Graven AK said. "You will help us create an army of dragon riders, a force that will crush the resistance and secure the Krulthax's domination of the galaxy." Zax shook his head, defiance etched in every line of his face. "I won't do it," he said. "I won't help you enslave these creatures, turn them into weapons." Graveneke's eyes hardened, and he leaned in close. "You will," he hissed. "Because if you refuse, I will give the order to exterminate every human colony we have captured. Billions will die, and their blood will be on your hands." Zax felt as if he had been punched in the gut. The thought of all those innocent lives, snuffed out because of his defiance, it was too much to bear. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "Fine," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it. But know this, Graven AK. One day, you'll pay for what you've done. One day, I'll make sure of it." The warlord only laughed, a harsh, buzzing sound that held no mirth. "We shall see, human," he said. "We shall see." And with that, Zax found himself facing a new challenge, one that would test not only his skills, but his very soul. He had to find a way to sabotage Graveneke's plan from within, to turn the Krulthax's own weapons against them. It was a daunting prospect, but as he looked into the eyes of the dragon at his side, he found a glimmer of hope. Together, they had already accomplished the impossible. Together, perhaps they could do so again. In the weeks that followed, Zax threw himself into the task of training the Krulthax warriors to ride dragons, but not for the reasons Graven AK had intended. While ostensibly teaching them how to tame and control the beasts, Zax was actually sowing the seeds of rebellion. He began by selecting the most promising candidates, not based on their loyalty to the Krulthax, but on their capacity for independent thought. These were the warriors who questioned orders, who showed a glimmer of moral unease at the Empire's cruelty. Slowly, carefully, Zax began to cultivate these qualities. During training sessions, he would drop subtle hints about the true nature of the Krulthax regime, about the suffering it inflicted on countless worlds. He spoke of honor, of the value of life, of the possibility of a better way. And as the warriors bonded with their dragon mounts, he encouraged them to see the beasts not as tools of war, but as sentient creatures deserving of respect. It was a delicate balance, a dangerous game that Zax knew could cost him his life if discovered. But he persevered, driven by the knowledge that every warrior he turned was a potential ally in the fight against Gravenek. And turn them he did. Slowly but surely, a network of sympathizers began to form among the dragon riders. They met in secret, discussing ways to undermine the Krulthax war machine from within. They sabotaged weapons, misdirected orders, and gathered intelligence to feed to the resistance. All the while, Zax continued to play the role of the dutiful servant, the broken human who had submitted to Gravenek's will. He endured the warlord's taunts and threats, the constant reminders of the fate that awaited humanity if he failed. But in the privacy of his own quarters, with only his dragon companion for company, Zax allowed himself to hope. He had set events in motion that could change the course of the war, perhaps even the fate of the galaxy itself. The tipping point came sooner than anyone expected. During a routine training exercise, a group of dragon riders suddenly broke formation and attacked their Krulthax overseers. It was a brief but fierce skirmish, ending with the rebels in control of the training ground. The news spread like wildfire, igniting pockets of resistance throughout the Krulthax ranks. Warriors who had chafed under Gravenek's rule for years seized the opportunity to strike back, their dragon mounts unleashing devastation on the Empire's infrastructure. Gravenek, faced with an insurgency that had sprouted in the very heart of his military, responded with characteristic brutality. He ordered the immediate execution of any warrior suspected of disloyalty and sent his most trusted legions to crush the rebellion. But the dragon riders, with Zax at their head, were ready. They met the loyalist forces in a series of blistering aerial battles, the sky above the Krulthax homeworld lit by the flash of energy weapons and the glow of dragonfire. It was during one such engagement that Zax and his mount, the dragon he had first tamed in the pits, found themselves facing off against Gravenek's personal guard. The warlord himself rode at the head of the formation, his massive war dragon bristling with weaponry. Zax urged his mount forward, locking eyes with his nemesis across the battlefield. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to end Gravenek's reign of terror once and for all. The two dragons clashed in a whirlwind of talons and teeth, their riders dueling with blades of superheated plasma. It was a battle that would be remembered for generations, a pivotal moment in the war that had consumed the galaxy. And when the smoke cleared, it was Zax who emerged victorious. Gravenek lay dead, his war dragon vanquished, and the Krulthax forces in disarray. The rebel dragon riders pressed their advantage, striking deep into enemy territory. They liberated human colonies, rallied allied species to their cause, and dismantled the Krulthax's war machine piece by piece. It was a long and bloody campaign, but in the end, the Empire fell. The Krulthax, their power broken and their leadership shattered, retreated to the fringes of known space. And Zax, the human who had started it all, found himself hailed as a hero. The dragon rider who had turned an enemy's weapon into the key to their defeat, who had lit the spark of rebellion in the very heart of darkness. But for all the accolades and honors, Zax knew that the true credit lay with those who had fought and died beside him. The brave warriors, human and alien alike, who had dared to dream of a galaxy free from the Krulthax's tyranny. And as he looked out over the stars, his faithful dragon at his side, Zax knew that their work was far from over. There were other worlds to liberate, other tyrants to topple. But for now, in this moment of hard-won peace, he allowed himself to savor the victory. The galaxy had a new legend, a new tale of hope and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The Legend of Zax Derringer, the Dragon Tamer. The war was over, but for Zax Derringer, the fight was never truly finished. There were always new threats to face, new injustices to combat. And so, even as the galaxy celebrated the fall of the Krulthax, Zax found himself preparing for yet another mission. Intelligence reports had filtered in about a remnant of the Krulthax Empire, a hardened core of loyalists who refused to accept defeat. Led by a particularly ruthless warlord, they had entrenched themselves on a remote planet, enslaving the local population and rebuilding their strength. Zax knew he couldn't allow this cancer to take root. If left unchecked, it could grow into a new threat, undoing all that had been achieved at such great cost. And so, with a heavy heart, he gathered his most trusted dragon riders and set out to end this menace once and for all. As they approached the planet, they were met with a sight that chilled even Zax's battle-hardened soul. The Krulthax had transformed the world into a fortress, bristling with defenses and teeming with war dragon riders. At their head was the warlord himself, a monstrous figure clad in armor of blackest chitin. His war dragon was a beast out of nightmare, twice the size of any Zax had ever seen, its scales pulsing with an eerie, sickly light. Zax knew that this would be his greatest challenge yet. But he also knew that he had no choice. The fate of countless lives hung in the balance. With a roar of defiance, he led his riders into battle. The sky above the planet erupted into chaos, a maelstrom of fire and fury. Dragons clashed with war dragons, their riders locked in mortal combat. Energy beams crisscrossed the air, while gouts of flame and clouds of corrosive gas filled the atmosphere. Zax and his mount, their bond forged in the crucible of countless battles, wove through the melee with grace and precision. They took down foe after foe, always seeking the warlord, the heart of the enemy force. And then, through the smoke and the fire, they found him. The warlord, his monstrous steed rearing up in challenge. Zax urged his dragon forward, plasma blade at the ready. What followed was a duel that would echo through the annals of history. Zax and the warlord, two master riders, two implacable foes, locked in a battle that would decide the fate of a world. They clashed again and again, their dragons rending the air with their roars. The warlord was a formidable opponent, his every move calculated and deadly. But Zax had the advantage of righteousness, the unbreakable will of a man fighting for something greater than himself. In the end, it was that will that proved decisive. In a final, desperate lunge, Zax's blade found its mark, piercing the warlord's armor and ending his cruel reign forever. With their leader fallen, the Krulthax forces fell into disarray. Zax and his riders pressed their advantage, driving the enemy back, liberating the enslaved population. When the smoke cleared, the planet was free. The last ember of the Krulthax Empire had been extinguished, the galaxy safe from their menace at last. But for Zax, there was little time to rest on his laurels. As he stood on a high cliff, his dragon at his side, he looked out over the stars, knowing that somewhere, a new threat was always waiting. But he also knew that wherever tyranny reared its head, wherever the innocent suffered under the boot of oppression, he and his dragon riders would be there. They would answer the call, as they always had, as they always would. For they were the guardians of the galaxy, the protectors of the weak and the champions of justice. They were the legend, the ones who had tamed the dragons and turned them against the darkness. And as long as they flew the skies, as long as the bond between rider and mount remained unbreakable, there would always be hope. Hope for a galaxy at peace, for a future free from fear. With a smile on his weathered face, Zax Derringer mounted his dragon once more. There were more adventures to be had, more wrongs to right. And he wouldn't have it any other way.